We are back with Game 6 of what I consider to be the greatest blitz match ever played. So a quick reminder, this is Magnus Carlsen versus Alireza Firouzja. It's the Banter Blitz Cup Final played on the 15th of April 2020. Full details are below. So it's blitz chess, 3 minutes on the clock. Now Alireza lost the last game with the black pieces. He made a terrible blunder early in the opening. Magnus pounced, it's now 2.5 each. So this is game 6. Alireza has white here. What could he come up with? So he starts off with e4, and now Magnus goes for the Sicilian. No more Alekhine defence. He got stung in the last game. He doesn't want to go down that route again. Now Alireza goes knight c3. You see knight f3 more commonly, but fine. Little sideline. And pawn to a6 from Magnus, even more of a sideline. This is blitz chess. The players like to mix it up. So we had knight f3, d6, and now Magnus is actually inviting a main line Najdorf. So if Alireza went d4 and we had a line like this, you're literally back in the main lines here. But we didn't have d4. Instead, Alireza went g3, and already at this moment, Magnus said, oh, I don't actually know what to do here. And it just shows, even at the elite level, they don't always know every single opening by heart. This isn't a world championship match. So we had bishop to g4 from Magnus, and it looks slightly strange perhaps to give up your bishop pair, because after h3 that's what Magnus does, but there are some points to this move. So having eliminated that knight, you now gain some extra control over these dark squares, and we'll now see that play out in Magnus's opening strategy. So he goes knight to c6, looking at these squares, very standard development. We had bishop to g2 here, g6 now from Magnus, castles from Alireza, bishop g7, and now knight e2 is a nice move, so it clears the way for this c pawn, and then you'll be playing for d4 soon. That's his plan. So we had knight to f6 from Magnus here, pawn c3, knight d7, and once again we can see Magnus's minor pieces are all aimed at this central dark square control. Both players are fighting for that break. So we had rook d1 preparing d4. Now Magnus jumped in the knight, picked up a tempo on the queen. It came to e3 here, and he was considering a few different moves right now, such as queen to b6, but he went with the quite principled pawn to c4, so it clamps on d4. Now you can't do that, or en passant is decent for black. You've fully equalised. So instead Alireza went pawn to b3, and here Magnus actually just blundered. So best here would be pawn b5, although it's not an ideal move to make, and Alireza said this would probably be dangerous because you're opening up this diagonal now for the bishop. So you could have pawn f4, kicks the knight. Yes, it can jump in here and you could have this captures, but then e5 comes, hitting the knight. d5 would block the diagonal, but then e6, f5. A position like this looks quite nice for white with the space, but it's double-edged. Anyway, we didn't have this line on the board. Instead of going b5, just protecting that c-pawn, Magnus castled, and then he said, oh, I'm just literally overlooking f4. What is wrong with me today? And f4 kicks the knight, comes in here, and Alireza just wins a pawn. So Magnus is getting frustrated at times in this match. You can really see it on camera. So after this one was captured, we had the bishop being taken here, the rook recaptured, and now Magnus's rook came to the half-open file. And Alireza said here, I have to convert this one. I'm a clean pawn up. You know, he must have blundered something here. So now rook b1 was played, hitting this pawn. And now this is excellent from the world champion. So he doesn't play a kind of routine move here like knight to a5. You hold the pawn, you attack this one, but after d3, where is the black counterplay coming from? That knight's actually stuck. White can just slowly improve. It's very hard to get counterplay. What Magnus did was queen to a5. He leaves this pawn on prise. Alireza took it, but now he takes this one, and he's just drumming up something on the queen side here to get some play going. Because as well, when he attacks this one now, and Alireza goes d3 to defend, Magnus notes, well, okay, at least I've got some squares along the second rank here. So rook b8 was played, challenging this one. That got exchanged off, and after this recaptured, it allowed Alireza this e5 break. So he opens up this deadly bishop, hitting the undefended knight, and it looks awful for black because you're also attacking this pawn. Now, can you find the best defensive move in this position for black? What did Magnus play here? And if you're enjoying this video and not subscribed to the channel, do consider subscribing, never miss another video in this series. So here Magnus played the excellent queen to a4. Not only does it hold the knight, but it also attacks this rook, which is undefended. I mean, if you'd moved that knight away or meekly defended it with the rook, then white can start capturing here, you see. That's the problem. The pawn recaptures, horrible structure, really nice for white. So this move just gives Magnus a tempo, and now he can take this pawn on e5. So he notes here, oh well, at least I'm getting back my pawn even though white has the pressure. What's his plan with rook f1? Well, now Alireza reveals it. He first plays queen e4 hitting the knight. Magnus defends, and now he goes pawn f5. So as is his usual style, he wants to rip things open, attack the king. And now even though Magnus has won his pawn back, it's still tricky as to find plans here. So he goes queen c2, he just notes, okay, let's go on an expedition, let's try and mix it up. g4 from Alireza, he starts getting his kingside pawns going, and now here Magnus should go with something like pawn to a5, just try and get his asset in the position going down the board. But instead he plays bishop f6, responding to Alireza's threats. So he wants to prevent this move, pawn to g5, but actually it's the best move in the position here, for the reason being that after captures, you've got this queen g4 move. Now it's not easy to spot this stuff, but the whole idea of these tactics is that you've got an undefended piece here, you've got an undefended piece here being x-rayed by the rook, by the queen rather, and also if you take this pawn here, you're suddenly ripping open lines towards the king. Now black does have a check here, so this is why this stuff is tough to calculate. But after the king sidesteps, there's still a threat to take and then attack the rook. So if the rook comes up the board to carry on protecting the knight here, well then you've got queen f3. You hit the bishop and you threaten to take and then attack this point here. So say the bishop blocks the file, well now takes, pawn takes, queen recaptures. Once again you hit the rook, you're threatening to take, the whole position is collapsing. So okay, you're not going to see all of this in blitz chess, but I just wanted to show you that actually this g5 move was working in one. It didn't need to be prepared how it was with Alireza's play with queen e3. Now we had pawn g5 from Magnus, so he shuts down all those ideas altogether. The rook came to c1 here, and it's kicking the queen away, protecting this pawn so that now the knight is free to move. That knight was holding the pawn otherwise. We now had this knight coming here. Again, Magnus notes that this is just a really bad piece. He needs to bring it into the game. This one came round into e4, and it's now holding the pawn, so that after pawn h6, defending this one, which was attacked twice, now Alireza can free up the rook, move it away, and that in turn frees up his queen to move because that one was babysitting the rook. Now we had knight to b3, so Magnus continues with this plan of bringing the knight into the danger zone, but actually this is a really bad move now because queen b6 is an excellent response from Alireza. The problem here is this knight is now pinned to the queen, and you can't take this pawn or obviously the knight will recapture. So what does Magnus do? He goes king to g7, defending this bishop because there was also a double attack here. That's why queen b6 was so good. So queen b7 was now played, it hits the undefended rook, that one came to f8 here, and now knight c5 simply is winning a piece. So Magnus captures here, and now can you see the best way to capture this piece? You have to do it in the right manner. So you need to go with the knight. If you go with the queen, then you're simply running into queen d4 check, and you're picking up the piece back. So Alireza saw this, he went with the knight here. And now Magnus picks up this pawn, however, and he does note on his stream that from a practical point of view, although white is winning, it's not so easy here because the king is very safe, white's king is open, e4 is coming, a5 is coming, it's tricky. So knight a5 was played by Alireza. The tricky thing is that that pawn was attacked, the queen was babysitting it, so he's trying to kind of get his pieces working. They're a bit uncoordinated. Now rook d8 from Magnus. The queen came back to e4, but Magnus is having none of it. He comes to c3, he doesn't want to trade queens, he hits this knight, and once again it's stumbling around. So it comes into c6, which might look nice, but now rook d2 comes, and here Alireza notes, he's getting activated, what am I going to do? And both players are running low on time now. So king h1 came, stepping off the checks. Now we had pawn a5, and here Alireza exclaims, I don't even know what to do, I don't have a move, where do I go? His bishop's stuck for squares, the queen is blockading this pawn, the knight doesn't have jumps, it's really tricky. So he goes knight to a7 here, a miserable looking move, pawn a4, knight b5, but now queen b2. There's pressure along this rank here, the pawn is coming very fast, so queen f3 was played, and that means that after pawn a3, you can at least capture that deadly pawn which is coming down the board. And this is the point, Alireza now has to give up a piece, so he jumps in with the knight here. And now can you see the best move in the position for black? So here Magnus played pawn to e4. You're decoying the white queen away from the defense of the knight. So the queen simply took the pawn, Magnus picked up here, the queen came back to f3, and now there was actually a really powerful move of rook to d3. I just want to show this one, because after queen e2, let's say, you're crashing through against the king here like this, and after it moves away, you've got this deadly check, the rook blocks, and you can enter into this kind of endgame, which is just completely winning for black. Okay, you're not going to see all of this stuff in Blitz, but it was a really nice idea there. Instead of going rook to d3, however, Magnus came queen b2 here, and both players are down to barely 15 seconds here. So we had the queen coming now to e4, Alireza just shuffles between these light squares really, he even chucks this pawn, it was likely to drop anyway, and now Magnus goes rook to c1, looking to get a pair of rooks off the board here. And once we have these recaptures, he brings his bishop into the danger zone and threatens mate in 1. So the queen drops back, we had queen c1 here, queen e2, queen f4, queen g2. Both players are just playing on their own colour complexes, and now Magnus goes h5. He's the one with the pressure in the position, he can get the pawns going. So the pawn captured here, Magnus picked up here, we had queen e2, queen f4, queen g2, king h6 here, the queen shuffled back, and now f5 from Magnus, and this is looking so menacing now, but they've barely got 7 seconds. So the queen came back to g2 here, and now Magnus blundered with a pre-move. He'd pre-moved queen e4 check, and this allowed Alireza to take here, the pawn recaptured, bishop e2. Everything's covered, this is a dead draw, but Magnus has no time, and this is what Alireza was playing on. So he goes bishop f4 here, we have bishop g4, e5, and both players are just shuffling here, no time on the clock. Magnus is desperate to cling on. Will the chess gods come to his rescue? Well, suddenly they do, when this position is called a threefold repetition, so he doesn't get flagged. So a draw in this game, but a really tense one. If you enjoyed this one and want to see the whole playlist, then click here. Thanks for watching, see you soon.